This video compares the World Crisis, GMT's World War I grand strategy game, with its World War II counterpart, A World at War. To avoid missing any future videos on this channel, be sure to subscribe. The World Crisis is the love child of A World at War, GMT's World War II grand strategy game, and the prequel games Gathering Storm and Storm over Asia. Since all four games belong to the same family, it is only natural to compare the World Crisis and A World at War. This may be especially helpful to A World at War players trying to decide whether to jump into World War I by playing the World Crisis. All ratings will be on a scale of 1 to 5. This comparison also eliminates any possible bias that might arise were I to compare the World Crisis to other World War I games, since it is clearly better. Let's start with components. First, the map boards. The A World at War European map board is a minimalist work of art, based on the map board from the original Rise and Decline of the Third Reich. Everything on the A World at War map board has a function. There are no superfluous elements purely for show. I rate the A World at War map board 4 out of 5. The World Crisis map board is based on the A World at War map board and follows the same principle that every feature is relevant to play. Terrain has been added so the map is more interesting, and for this reason I rate it a maximum 5 out of 5. I know many people agree with me. This image doesn't do the World Crisis map board justice. Close-ups are much clearer. When it comes to the A World at War counters, I have spent a lot of time looking at them, and I find them clear and uncluttered, as well as attractive. 5 out of 5. The World Crisis counters resemble the A World at War counters, and many will quickly be recognized by A World at War players. In addition, the World Crisis introduces innovative hexagonal terrain counters, and also has activity counters, similar to Gathering Storm and Storm over Asia. I give the World Crisis counters 5 out of 5 as well. This is clearly a subjective question of taste, and there may be people who don't like the counters from either game. Next is the steepness of the learning curve. How difficult is it to get into the game and start playing it? A World at War is complicated. It recreates all of World War II in both the European and Pacific theaters. It is not as incomprehensible as some people think. Many people play it. But I would give A World at War a 2 out of 5 for complexity. A higher rating would reflect a simpler game. The World Crisis is hardly a beer and pretzels game, but World War I was fought in only one theater, and it was technologically simpler. Everything is there, but there is less for the game to cover. I rate the World Crisis as 4 out of 5. The simplest and most superficial indication of game complexity is the length of the rulebook. The A World at War rulebook weighs in at 252 pages, for reasons that have been explained in detail elsewhere. But for some potential players, the length of the A World at War rules is a killer. So I will give A World at War another 2 for a rulebook length. The World Crisis rulebook, in contrast, is just under 50 pages in length, shorter than both the Gathering Storm and Storm over Asia rules. This is not completely accidental. The World Crisis deliberately avoids exceptions in Chrome, tempting as it is to include these features in a game. 4 out of 5 for the World Crisis rulebook. Next is the stability of the rules. How much are they likely to change in the future? Another myth about A World at War is that the rules are always changing. But in fact, there are fewer and fewer changes every year, and the rules have been evolving for decades. I rate A World at War rule stability as 4 out of 5. For the World Crisis, I would rate rule stability lower, at 3. The reason is simple. There can never be enough playtesting, so it's possible problems may emerge as the game reaches a wider audience. how much help is available to players moving up the learning curve, regardless of its steepness. For A World at War, there's a huge amount of support, including videos, articles, and a forum where many experienced players will answer questions or explain rules within minutes. 5 out of 5. Not surprisingly, The World Crisis has a lower rating in this area, 3 out of 5. This is simply because the game is newer, so there has been less time to develop a similar support network. Next, we get to playability, which has a number of aspects. The first is a practical one. How much space is required to play the game? Considering the scope of the games, I would give A World at War a 3, and the same for The World Crisis. Both require a spacious playing area. Then there's record keeping. A World at War requires considerable record keeping, not only for research and diplomacy, but also for the basic resource points that are the foundation of the game's economics. 2 out of 5, and only because both the paper sheets and the Excel spreadsheets used for record keeping make the task easier. As pointed out in a previous video, in The World Crisis, there are no BRPs or tile points to track. The activity counters themselves do all the work. The only record keeping is for research, so a top rating of 5 out of 5. As far as e-play is concerned, A World at War is blessed with War Planner, which is a superb platform that rates 5 out of 5. However, The World Crisis may also be played on War Planner, and my rating for The World Crisis is only slightly lower at 4, because the programming is a work in progress. There are also vassal modules for both games. For playing time, there is a great deal of variation for A World at War, depending on the experience and personality of the players. A 2-theater campaign game usually fills the entire week of the Board Game Players Association convention, so I will rate A World at War as 3 out of 5. The playing time for The World Crisis is hard to determine during the playtesting stage, but since the game is simpler and the war is usually shorter, it stands to reason that it will take less time to play than A World at War. I will give The World Crisis 4 out of 5. Finally, how easy is it to find opponents? A World at War has a substantial pool of players, and finding opponents is part of the support for the game referred to earlier, so 5 out of 5. The World Crisis, as a newer game, is not yet at this point, so right now 3 out of 5, but this rating can be expected to go up once the game is published. The last category is enjoyment, which is definitely the most subjective. After all, not everyone likes playing A World at War, and presumably would react the same way to The World Crisis. It is a question of taste, and here I get to do the ratings. For the ratio of skill to luck, I would rate A World at War as a 5 out of 5. The better player almost always wins, which I think is a good thing. I think the same is true for The World Crisis, but it's harder to tell at this point, so I will rate The World Crisis as 4 out of 5 for the ratio of skill to luck. Another aspect of playability is how forgiving a game is. If a single error can cost you the game, as it can in chess, this makes the game harder to play. I would rate both games as 4 out of 5 for forgiveness. While a truly terrible mistake might be fatal, in both The World at War and The World Crisis, players can usually recover from errors, although it is better to avoid them in the first place. A game with high replay value doesn't get stale. When you finish a game, you immediately want to start another one. I find A World at War has a very high replay value, especially when Gathering Storm and Storm over Asia are played first. I find myself thinking, in the next game I won't make the same mistakes. And I usually don't. I make different mistakes. I suspect that the same will be true for The World Crisis, but right now I will hedge my bet and rate it 4 out of 5 for replay value. Then there's fun. This is extremely subjective, but seeing the Hood sink the Bismarck, Germany nuke London, and Russia firestorm Hiroshima and Nagasaki for a one-turn Allied win does it for me. As does Germany destroying a Russian army in summer 1914 in the hex-containing Tannenberg. My completely objective opinion, 5 out of 5 for both games. Determining which game comes out on top involves some math. It also requires an assumption that the 4 categories of components, learning the game, playability, and enjoyment should all be given equal weight. This assumption is questionable, especially since more experienced players will value playability and enjoyment more. It turns out a World at War comes out ahead on learning the game and enjoyment, while the World Crisis scores higher on components and playability. Giving each of the 4 categories equal weight, the result is a tie. This wasn't contrived, but at least it explains why I find playtesting the World Crisis as much fun as playing a World at War.